Listen up. There's no more excuses. We're empowering those who want the hustle by exposing the status quo.
The days of ordinary are over.
It's time to crush mediocrity and start discovering your greatest potential.
Welcome to the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation.
Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today, we've got a real treat in the virtual house is Jordan Carroll, aka the Remote Job Coach. He creates content, courses, and coaching programs to help high performers learn a process to land legitimate remote jobs and gain more freedom and flexibility in their lives. He's worked remotely since 2013 in different capacities for a Fortune 50 company, multiple startups, and his own businesses. His unique experiences have enabled him to help thousands of remote job seekers with his methodologies to find success in their search. He's the author of the best-selling book, Remote for Life, founder of the Remote Job Club, and in-demand international keynote speaker. Jordan has lived and worked in 15 plus countries on 5 continents and commits time and 10% of his company's profits to organizations helping refugees find remote work. How awesome is that? Jordan, welcome to the show.
In the virtual house.
Let's
go.
Love it.
In the virtual house.
Thanks so much for being
here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm excited to talk about this because it's a very interesting subject. But before we start bombarding you with questions, tell us a little bit more about what you do. And, well, I think we're going to get to how you got to this remote work thing.
Yeah, well, everyone does remote work now, right?
Mostly.
Sure.
I mean, I think the intro covers a lot of it, the 80-20. So to add any additional context to that, I just love using remote work as a tool for freedom and flexibility and fulfillment in your life. And I noticed as I was in my journey doing that, there was other people who were asking me questions like, how are you doing that? I was like, hey, when enough people ask you questions about what you're doing, you should probably start a business about it. That's what I did.
That's
Very good.
That's cool. So what were you doing before all this came about?
I worked in corporate out of college. I worked at IBM, which is, as you can tell by my tank top, probably not the most comfortable place for me. I mean, at the time, I didn't know. You know, as corporate, that's the way you're supposed to go, right? You go to college, you get a nice corporate job, you do this, do that. So I felt like I was kind of following along this mold that was created for me by society in many ways. And at some point along the way, I think there was one specific moment where I was sitting in a round table with all these folks, you know, colleagues from my team, a couple of executives or directors from this large trucking company in Seattle, Washington. And we were sitting there trying to strategize how we could help them prevent losing money from warranted door parts. And I realized this is the most, can I swear on this podcast?
Absolutely.
This is the most fucking boring conversation I've ever had in my life. I was like, we're talking about how a door handle, like a warranty for like a door handle on a truck, could be sent in as a fraudulent claim and how we can predict if it's fraudulent. I'm like, this is stupid. Like, I'm not contributing anything to the world. What am I doing? And I kind of had like this come to Jesus moment, I guess you could say, where I was like, I want to do something that actually means something to me. And I was also just lost in life. You know, I felt like I'd kind of pushed myself into a corner about who I was. And a lot of that was conditioned into me by society about what I thought I was supposed to do. And I ended up breaking up with my girlfriend at the time, having an existential crisis, leaving Portland, Oregon, and then I started traveling the world. And so that's like one of the biggest like moments in which everything kind of shifted for me. And I was working, when I left IBM, I was working for this small PR firm up in Portland. And I noticed that each decision I made, it made other bigger decisions in the future easier. But I had to like go through some of those first like really dramatic things to change and to realize, wow, I've like put myself in this little convenient box and like looked at my life inside of this without thinking that there's other things available. And then I remember just my whole mindset shifted at that point when I was like, wow, there's like a whole world available to me. Not only figuratively, like go traveling the world, but there's this whole world of like opportunity where I could freelance. I could work at a company that allows me to work remotely. I can start my own business. I can do all these types of things. So that was kind of some initial points along the journey to where I got. And then I ended up working for a company that allowed me to travel around the world. And that was really when everything kind of took off in my mind about how I could start a business helping people do it too.
How many companies were open to or allowed remote work at that time? That must have been 2012, 2013.
2013 was when I started at IBM. So I worked there for 4 years. And then I worked, is it 2013, 17? Yeah, so that would have been around 2017, 2018 was when I basically left my PR job. And then I started my own freelancing business as well as my first version of my coaching business. And then I ended up getting a job at a company that was fully distributed, fully remote, and very few. And it's still to this day, it's the smallest amount of companies that are the ones that allow you to do that. I mean, you can structure things in different ways where, you can be a contractor in freelance, and that'll give you more flexibility. But I was a W-2 employee. So I was a W-2 employee that actually had the ability to travel anywhere in the world.
And how long did that take for you from a mindset shift standpoint? Right? You talk about sitting in the boardroom and kind of the epiphany, so to speak, to, shifting your mind to, this might be possible, this is possible, and now I'm going to make it possible.
Yeah, I think that was brewing well before that boardroom moment. The boardroom moment was like a last straw kind of thing. So that it'd been going through the back of my mind. I remember, and there's even this guy that I used to work with. He told me at one point, he's like, I remember you told me that you were going to go travel the world at some point, and like that was like really important to you. And that was years before that happened. It was probably 2 years before that happened. So for me, it was interesting how some things can just remain in our subconscious, and then it just takes certain moments where you feel like you're getting pushed to the edge or backed so far into a corner that you actually have to change. And so from that moment when I had that last straw, it was probably another like 6 months or so before I had fully left. But I had started preparing. I was like, okay, what do I need to do to get the hell out of here? And from a strategic perspective, because even if your mindset is shifted and you're kind of like checked out, there's still strategy involved in how do I do this with the minimum amount of collateral damage to my career, as well as like my personal relationships and like everything else.
So as you work with a lot of people, looking for this remote work, right? Which to your point, I mean, almost everybody to some extent has remote work at different levels, right? One of the challenges that I've seen for a lot of people is discipline, right? So the old model of you walk into an office, or a manufacturing facility, whatever, you walk in, you start at a certain time, you end at a certain time. You knew you had to do work in those times. The minute you introduce remote work, that lack of discipline can really get in your way significantly. So as you're working with people that are kind of going down this path, is there parts of that where you're working with them about how do you stay disciplined and how do you still achieve your goals in this kind of new framework?
Absolutely. I think first couple of things we look at is what's the environment you've created for working. So even just as simple as, hey, like, let's not work on your bed. Like that's a good place to start. Like, because this was when I initially started working remotely. It was because of a snow day. So I got there was a snow day, and I was living in Boston, Massachusetts, and they were having the worst winter of 10 years. So hell, I'm not driving anywhere. There was nowhere to drive. So we got to work from home, and for me at that time, it just meant a few extra hours of sleep. Like I didn't use that to get better or like improve, like practice any self-development or anything like that. It was just like, oh, I can go back to sleep. So I think there's a mindset shift that first needs to occur where that extra time from the commute can be used towards bettering yourself in some way. And then there's the actual physical environment that you create for yourself. Because at that time, it was 2013. So we didn't have as much, the video conferencing wasn't really a big thing. So you were always on conference calls and you just dial in. So you just put the phone. I mean, I'm on a conference call it's an all hands call at IBM. That's like hundreds, if not thousands of people. I'm turning it on as a, it's a formality for me. So then I just put it to the side and just fall asleep. So that's literally what I was doing. So I know that there are a lot of temptations as well, like having Netflix out of the corner of your eye, staring at you, ready to be turned on, or, even people using just cleaning as a distraction, or feeling like there are things that you need to do before you can get in the state of being ready. So I think the environment is really important, like setting up a different part of your apartment, condo, house, whatever, that can be used for working. If you have a separate bedroom, that's even better. But I understand people are working with limitations, right? And they have kids or all these things. But get as far as you can into a corner somewhere where it's like, if I sit down in this area, it means that I'm working and I can like switch my mind to that. Another couple things I think would be using your calendar. There are a lot of folks who, if there's not like, I use time blocking. So on my actual calendar, even if there's empty space, there is something there as a block so that I know what I'm doing. And I can categorize those blocks into whatever. It could be whatever is good for that person to categorize them into. I would actually use the calendar for all personal things as well as all work things. So having a comprehensive calendar that's like, I have my breaks scheduled in there. I've got my lunch in there. I've got my meetings with my friends in there. I've got errands that I need to run in there. And then I've got administration tasks, and I've got like deep work stuff. And I have, however you need to categorize that, putting it all in the calendar so that you have one version of truth is really great. And then the last thing, just to give a couple of nuggets here, is using an app like FocusMate. FocusMate is a virtual co-working platform where you can select 25, 50-minute, or 75-minute intervals of virtual co-working. And it's amazing. It's one of the best productivity tools on the planet. One of my good friends is a CEO, so he's always happy when I'm talking about them. But I actually became friends with him because of how much I loved the product. And you just select what times you want to use that for, and then you jump on, and then you have someone to answer to. So it makes, I think, getting used to what deep work means rather than what distracted work means. So like turning off your cell phone, like having it on airplane mode, not have, like, even simply what you have on your computer up on your screen. If you have email on your screen as a default, if email is on your screen, and I have two screens, so I'm like looking between two. One screen will be my calendar and my task manager. The other screen will be the one task I'm working on. And that is very crucial to me. When I first start working with someone, it's like, hey, show me your calendar. Let's see where it is that we need to audit what you're spending your time on. And then let me understand how it is you're actually using your computer and what's on your screen. Because if email is on your screen, if text messaging is on your screen, if Slack is on your screen, and those things are open, your mind is going to switch context, and you're going to go to every single notification on there, and you're going to lose track of whatever that main task was.
Good stuff. I love that. Jordan, I want to go back just a little bit. When you became the remote job coach, you obviously did this for a little while, and you learned the nuances of what you were good at, what you were capable of, or maybe not remotely. At what point did you realize, like, wow, I can help millions or thousands of other people do this? When did that light bulb go off, and how did that happen?
So I did a program in early 2018 called Remote Year. Remote Year is a company that facilitates travel programs for people that already work remotely. So let's say that I work remotely and I want to start traveling, and I have the capacity to do that within my job. I contact Remote Year, I pay them a monthly fee, and they set up a co-working space for me, an apartment. I have a community I'm traveling with, as well as events, all these things in a different country each month. Okay, so that concept, kind of understand that concept?
For sure.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's almost like studying abroad, but for adults that work remotely, in a sense. Turnkey digital nomadism. So I went on a program in the beginning of 2018 in order to get a job with the company. Because the moment that I found out about this company, I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever heard. I'm like, I can go to a different country every month and work remotely with all these different people. So at the time, I was kind of building the first iteration of my coaching business. I was freelancing for a couple different companies, but I wasn't making a lot of money to be able to long-term sustain that lifestyle. I was still digging into my savings to pay for this program, but I did a 4-month program with them. So we went to a new country every single month. We went to Lisbon, Portugal. We went to Prague, Czech Republic. We went to Split, Croatia, and we went to Cape Town, South Africa. And I'm traveling with 45 different people that I've never met in my life for 4 months on this experience. And one of my main goals was get a job at Remote Year. So when I was on the program, I'm like talking to all the employees and I'm just getting really familiar with them. I'm telling them that, hey, I want to work for the company. This is exactly the role I want. And I really showed up like in the community that we were in. I was like doing presentations and I would help out the people that worked at Remote Year. I was present. I was very present and I made myself known. And by the end of that program, I had 2 people that submitted my resume for me. Basically, the interview process and that whole journey of me getting a job with them was a formality at that point. I had done so much to become known in the community as a client that there was no way they were going to tell me that I couldn't work for them because I just knew everything about the company. And this is one of the lessons that I have for people about trying to find remote work is if you can become really embedded in the ecosystem of an organization to the point where you understand all the nuances of what their customer goes through, of how they talk, of what they're looking for, you can very easily articulate your value in that context. So I took that very seriously. And of course, I get the job. Well, the job was actually selling the programs. So I was remotely selling programs about these remote programs to travel the world. Is Inception, basically. I'm like, I'm doing this while I'm selling it while I'm doing this. And it was great. But the interesting thing was that about 50% of people that contacted Remote Year thought that we helped them find remote jobs. They thought that we were going to hire them to work and travel with us, when in reality it was they needed a remote job to be on the program. Like that was the whole point because they're paying us. So once I started seeing that this was a trend, because our call metrics at that time were 80 dials a day minimum. So we were getting a ton of inbound and we were outbounding people and we were getting calls scheduled on our calendar, very high volume sales, and like high quota, high volume as far as calls. So again, 50% of those people I'm talking to, they're like, I don't have a remote job, but you guys help me get one, right? I'm like, no. And we literally tried to tweak our marketing so much, but people just don't read. So I was like, wow, if this many people are calling in to Remote Year saying that they don't know how to find a remote job, there's probably a business there. On the other side of that, people were also messaging me saying, hey, how are you traveling around the world working for a company in this country, in this country, in this country? So I started creating just like little resources. It started off with like Google Sheets. I just would have like a bunch of the websites in there that you could find remote jobs. I'd have like a little guide that I created and I would send that out to people, because me getting them in a position where they could find a remote job would actually also help Remote Year at that time. So I was like starting to build it as a side business. And then eventually I got to a point where I started taking on clients and I needed to make a decision. It's like, I either need to go down this path of, fully pursuing this, or I need to just stay with Remote Year and start focusing more on that. And I made the decision to leave and go do my own thing.
So for the people listening, and they say, you know what, this Jordan guy is pretty freaking cool. I love this story. I want to work remote. And everybody wants more opportunity and flexibility. Mm-hmm. However, there are a lot of companies that are still not fully on board with this remote concept. And I've heard from different friends that, our company wants us back, or, they're open to some hybrid stuff, but ultimately they don't really want to give their employees full autonomy. What kind of advice do you give, or do you coach your clients to approach their employer and say, I want to go fully remote and I want to have this conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's two routes. One is the negotiation process with a current company. That is a completely different process than what else I'm going to say, but that requires leverage first and foremost, and it requires an understanding of HR policy and what your company can and can't do. The reason that these companies have these types of restrictions is because there are tax and legal pieces of this that they become subject to if you are in a different country, or sometimes even if you're in a different state. So depending on how they've incorporated, depending on how they've set up their employers of record, depending on a lot of different more technical pieces that I'm not an expert in, companies just don't have the ability to allow you to do some of those things. So my recommendation is twofold. One is, if that is the case in which your company is going back to the office and does not have what I would consider a remote first mindset, then accept that for what it is. Instead of trying to completely go against the grain, it may be an option at some point to negotiate for that. But I would say gain more leverage in first deciding, hey, what is the lifestyle that I want to live, and what's the remote level that is needed for me to live that? Someone who just wants to work from home in rural Arkansas and not go into the office is very different from someone who wants to live a lifestyle like myself and travel to Mexico or travel to different parts of Latin America, right? So first get really clear on what the lifestyle is, and that will align you to what kind of remote capacity you need. Because if you just need to stay within the state, that might be a much easier negotiation than if I'm trying to go travel full time. So first, understand that. Second is, if your company doesn't have that capacity to be able to give you that lifestyle, then I would start only searching for companies that do allow you to do that. And when we talk about like fully remote companies that are allow you to work from anywhere, those are the least amount of companies available, like the least amount of job opportunities and least amount of companies available. So there's a small list of those in relativity to other companies. So I would go find those and do what I was saying to do, was get really embedded in their ecosystem, start to meet people at those organizations. LinkedIn is a great place to be able to do some of that research and to be able to do some relevant outreach there. Start to join their newsletters, start to follow their social media, and start to engage with the company, even if they don't have jobs available in your field. The idea is that what we should always be doing is creating proximity, digital proximity, to the people who are stakeholders in us getting a job at the company that we want to be at. But we need to first identify the ideal lifestyle, and then the companies that are the exact companies that will allow us to do that. And you'll be much more excited to do that for a company that you really like than to just do that for a bunch of random companies. So instead of what most people do, they just go on job boards and they try to like sift through the job boards, and a thing will say remote and they're like, oh, this is great. But then they'll read the fine print. It's like remote here, right? So just find the companies that already have a history of hiring people all over the world. I post a lot of them on like my Instagram, and I post a lot of them on my social media so that people know where they can go look. I also have a job board where people can go look at those types of companies and find what's the low-hanging fruit. Do I know someone at the company already? Do I know someone who knows someone at the company already? Is there some type of connection point I could have with someone that works at the company, whether that be through the content that they post, or that be that we went to the same university, or you're just trying to create an inroads that's not through the traditional application process where you just apply online. And when you get really strategic in this way, you can start to build out your exit plan if you are currently working at a company that doesn't allow that. And then once you've kind of built up some interviews or maybe even some traction with these companies, you might decide you want to leave your job. And that's where you have more leverage to bring up the conversation. But if you're just going to go have the conversation, hey, I want to go work remotely. If you're going to do that, then I would recommend having as much data as possible on when you did work remotely, how that happened, and what kind of leverage that you have genuinely. Because there's a lot of people who maybe haven't really tracked some of that, or they don't have great leverage because they either just haven't been aware that they needed that, or whatever the excuse is. But go back and retroactively build out that leverage to have that conversation. And if you don't have it, you need to build it through finding new opportunities.
Jordan, what's fascinating about what you're saying, kind of the undertone of your story, and then even what you're talking about with remote work is kind of three things, value, production, and culture, right? So so many times when people talk about remote work, one of the challenges for a lot of businesses is they're concerned that if somebody is remote, they're maybe not disciplined, right? So they're not creating the value, they're not getting the production that they need, right? Because the kind of old way of management was management by walking around, right? Just are you working, et cetera. And then, but what I thought was most interesting is you kind of referenced the culture, right? You talked about, the remote year and how you led with embedding yourself in the culture on how they talked about things and one of the things that I think is so interesting in this new world, even in the hybrid world, there's a lot of people that say it's so difficult to manage culture in a remote or hybrid environment. My feeling always has been is you have a culture no matter what. I mean, there are companies that are 100% remote that absolutely have a culture, and it doesn't mean it's a bad culture either, right? But they do have to be more intentional a lot of times because there's people not just kind of walking by each other. So, are there key tips and tricks, for those that are remote that are maybe, remote, they're trying to become ingrained in a company, ways in which they can integrate into a culture that maybe that company isn't 100% remote, but just that person is.
Yeah, I think so. You're spot on there, and I think one of the other things that you're kind of pulling a thread on was that remote work doesn't mean the same thing to all companies or all people. There is no standardization around this term remote work. Remote work to one company might be hybrid, where they're coming in a couple times a week, and that's just some people, but other people are fully remote. There's so much complexity around discerning what remote actually means to a company. So my whole point is find the companies that are really fucking clear on what remote means to them, because there are so many companies that are unclear about what that means to them, and that is a symptom of this remote by accident that happened in kind of the migration to remote work during the pandemic. So what that caused was a lot of companies who had never had to think about a remote work policy to go completely remote and basically take what their office was and make that a virtual thing. And what that meant was a lot of Zoom meetings. It meant tracking people and their computers. It meant a lack of trust. It meant micromanagement virtually. It meant all these things. And what I really want job seekers to look at is, from the culture perspective, how does the company think about remote work? And then how do they actually implement remote work? Are they working on an asynchronous fashion? And what that means is, are they working in a way in which messages and communication and projects can be moved forward across different time zones without people needing to be synchronous on a Zoom call, for instance? There are cultures like Doist, Zapier, GitLab, for instance. These are like really popular remote, like fully remote distributed companies where they lead with, let's not have meetings at all. Like their whole thing is few meetings as possible. Let's document everything we're doing. And yes, this is more work up front, but if you're documenting every single thing and then you're sending that to the people to on your team to get buy-off, to take the next step, to whatever, that can create a culture where remote is not only okay or allowed, but it's supported. So that's the distinction I really want to make, is like, is it remote okay or remote allowed because of the circumstance? Or is it remote enabled and remote supported because this company's actually had some intentionality around building a culture with remote first ideology? And so as a job seeker, you're looking into these companies and you're saying, what level of remote do I need to feel comfortable? And what kind of lifestyle do I want to live? And of course, you're going to have a certain value in the marketplace based on your competence. So you need to have a certain level of competence to be able to work at one of these types of companies. And then you're evaluating based on conversations that you can have with people and research that you do along the way. You'll never truly know how a company functions internally until you're there, right? But you can do things like set up informational interviews. You can do things like deep research on what their core values are and how they inhabit those things. You can research by joining their newsletter and following their social media to see what kind of external messages that they're sending to potential clients. And it'll start to make more sense once you get more practice with it too. Because if you do this with a few different companies and you start embedding yourself in their ecosystems, you'll start to see little moments where you can take advantage of these micro touch points, where it's like, I'll give you an example. I'm on a coaching call yesterday with a bunch of clients. And what we do is we do live networking on LinkedIn, where I literally share my screen. I ask for all their target companies. We'll put a filter on LinkedIn to find content that people at their target companies are posting. We'll look at a piece of content that someone's posted, and we'll look at all the ways in which you can network with that person or send a specific type of message that now gets a conversation started. One of them had posted an article that she had written for the company, and it was shared by another person at the company. So we're looking at this post and we're like, okay, this was shared by this person, but this article was written by this person, and it's also about this conference. So how many assets do we have to leverage in this post? Well, we could have both people. We have the conference, we have the hashtags, we have the article. And then we dug one layer deeper. We just went to their profiles. We found out one of the women who had posted it originally also had her own website, and she had a personal newsletter for her side business. And so we're like, okay, well, why don't we join the personal newsletter? And now all of a sudden, when she sends out a personal newsletter and you reply to her personal newsletter, how much more effective you think that that's going to be, being a newsletter subscriber responding to her email, than someone who's just randomly sending her a message about wanting a job online? So we try to take these really creative angles into the company to learn more about them. But in order to even get in touch with these kind of people, we have to be very strategic, even about the micro touch points that we're making along the way.
I love that you're integrating some marketing. But when I hear you talk about all this, I'm starting to wonder, at what point, instead of just helping job seekers, do you start helping employers rather, and companies adapt this remote first, or maybe it's just a remote centric where they welcome and they understand that that's going to be a part of the future and they want to?
Yeah, I've had companies approach me for that. There is a recruiting arm to my business where I've helped companies hire. Now, instituting policies, instituting remote at the scale that a lot of them are looking for, I don't deem myself qualified. And I'll tell you why, is because I've never done it. So I have a lot of confidence in my ability to help a job seeker because I've done exactly what I'm telling them to do. And I do it in front of them. And it works. So when I think about my qualifications and like what I want to, and the place that I want to play, is at the moment, it's more in the B2C space with the job seekers. However, I will say that I do have a bunch of different partners and people that I really respect and admire who do exactly what you're saying, who I collaborate with. And if I do have those opportunities from companies, I basically send them to the people who I know have a much better pedigree helping companies with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, seems like a lot of companies want to be more progressive. A lot of companies are looking in new places for talent. Qualified talent's always going to be a big KPI for all of them. Yet I do feel like one of the things missing is maybe adapting. And I've heard companies say we're people first, but I think if you're people first culture, people first initiative, you have to welcome or at least be open to the remote work aspect of things.
Yeah, I think at this point you don't really have a choice. like the companies that don't think about it in some way and try to institute some boundaries around it or institute some sort of policies to clarify their stance. I think they're the one. Like you see a lot of these companies, like take Amazon for instance. Amazon just recently announced that they are bringing a large majority of their workers back to the office who have been working remotely since the pandemic. And there was a Slack channel that garnered more than 15,000 people, I think, or maybe 5,000 people within like an hour. An employee Slack channel that had come out, it was called Remote Work Advocates or something. And it's like a internal mutiny, basically, of just like no, we don't want to go back. And what you're going to see is if the companies that really take a strong stance on bringing people back without choice and without any sort of parameters or criteria for their decisions, is that they're going to get a ton of pushback. And you've also seen Amazon stock. The whole market's been plummeting, but them in particular have not been doing very well. And they've done layoffs. They have now tried to bring people back to the office. They're now facing this next big resistance, and we'll see how it plays out. I don't ever see Amazon's kind of like too big to fail kind of feel for me in a lot of ways, but at the same time, if you lose thousands of good people and those people are going to companies that are respecting their ability to choose, then at some point, like, this migration is going to really, really impact every company who makes a decision like this.
Jordan, shifting gears just a little bit, one of the things that I'm always fascinated by is a lot of times people will look at someone like yourself, all your success, and want to say, well, I want to be like Jordan, right? The challenge a lot of times is they miss all of the things leading up to that, right? All the challenges, the heartaches, the struggles, the forks in the road where you may have thought, maybe I'm not cut out for this, right? Because we all go through those challenges. Was there any point as you were going through this process in particular where you almost felt like there was a fork in the road, but you decided to double down and that ended up paying off?
Yeah. You mean like today? Like, it's a constant, man. There's a constant question in my head of, is this really what I want to be doing? Is this where I want to be? And I think that's part of being a human in general. And when I think about people that want to quote unquote be like me, I don't really encourage that ever. I encourage people to be more like themselves. And I think what ends up happening is we get, like I was saying with my early years in corporate, it's like I didn't even know who I was because I was so conditioned by what I thought I was supposed to be doing. So most of my work is in an attempt to give people an opportunity to become more self-aware about what they actually want. So they may think that they want what I have, but the reality is if I gave most of them what I have tomorrow, they would not want that. And they'd go live a day in it and they'd be like, no, this isn't for me. And that could be the shock value of living in different countries and not, it could be not wanting to run a business. It could be, XYZ. It could be a bunch of different things. But I think at the end of the day, each person has idealizations that they make about lifestyles. It's the green grass concept, the greener grass concept. And I think just getting to be more in touch with who you actually are and what you actually want is the first step. And yeah, there's been tons of inflection points for me, forks in the road. Yeah, I've even thought many times, like right after I finished my book last year in November, I immediately was like, I don't even think I want to do this anymore. And I was like, I just spent 2 years writing a book about a concept that I don't even want to do anymore. I was like, why would I ever feel that way? And I made myself feel guilty. I was like, how could I have spent that much money, time, energy, effort, and then have this reaction? But the truth is at least when you're doing a creative endeavor like a book, and you take years and it's the number one thing on your mind, and all of your creative energy is into it, and then you're done, it just is so abrupt and it's so weird, and you're just like, okay, what do I do with all this energy now that I've been pushing into this book? And now, where do I put it? Where do I stand with this? And that's been a more recent fork for me. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, I don't think I'm decided yet either.
Well, it's interesting. I think people want your lifestyle. Maybe not so much to be like you, but I think that's when people get jealous of others, it's, well, I want that in my life. I want to do those things. And I go back to something you said earlier on where you help people kind of almost craft a vision and a goal for what is it that you really want. Before you go off and say, I want to work remote, what are you going after and why? And I think when people are able to craft their vision, and in marketing, which is what I do, so many people don't have that. And so they kind of go through marketing and business aimlessly, throwing things against the wall, no consistency, because of that limited success, lots of stress.
Mhm.
And I think when you have that vision, and that's going to change, just like you said, over time. You didn't know. I had the same issue when I published my book, and next thing you know, you're doing something different, and that's okay, I think.
I think it has to be okay, because life is just a series of evolutionary moments where you're just figuring out what the fuck to do. I mean, no one really knows either. It's like we're all just kind of going through this, making our best educated guesses at all times. And I think, to your point, it's like, yeah, people want this lifestyle, but what are they willing to sacrifice to have it? I don't see my family. Is that important to someone? Probably. I see my family maybe once a year. So there's like things like that that maybe people don't think about, or they don't realize is like, oh yeah, you can go live in the sunshine, you can go live in Mexico and all these things, but are you willing to learn Spanish? Are you willing to walk down the street and not understand what people are saying? Are you willing to uh, do X, Y, and Z that may be really far out of your comfort zone in order to have this? And I think when the reality strikes of what it's actually like, most people who say that to me have the actual opportunity to do it, but they're holding themselves back. And they will make every reason and every excuse to not live this lifestyle. But at the end of the day, it's their responsibility and their choice. And, has nothing to do with me.
As I hear you say that, Jordan, there's an old Marines quote. I don't know if you heard it before, but everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die, right? And
Yeah.
it's the hard work and the different things. To your point, the sacrifices you need to make, the things skills you need to develop in order to pull these things off. One of the things that really resonated for me with you was kind of your relentless focus on, each week, each day. How do you get the most out of that day? And one of the things you reference is, kind of your Sunday reflection process as you're looking to the week. I'm always fascinated by a process like that, because many times there's a lot of time, pain, and anguish that's gone into perfecting it, or at least improving it to a point where you use it consistently.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of how it's developed and the impact that it's made?
Yeah, it's taken a lot of different iterations over the years, but I think it starts on the micro level of journaling every day. And when I say every day, I mean usually 4 or 5 times a week. And I'll journal in a journal like this. It's a 5-minute journal from Intelligent Change. And from there, on Sundays, what I'll do is I will enter into a Google Doc all of the journal entries that I had. So I have a digital version and I have the written version. And when I recap on Sundays, the digital version, I get to re-go through and relive the wins, the gratitude, the lessons learned, and all those things these have prompts. So this is a prompted journal. So like it'll have a section for what you're grateful for, what would make today great, affirmations, the good things that happen, and then what I learned. So I use this on the daily basis to get me to the weekly reflection. Then on the weekly reflection, I transfer all those into a Google Doc. I ask myself a few more questions about that. And so I kind of consider that the reflection process. And then I have a progression process where I look at about the 5 things that I would do this upcoming week, that would make it, the ultimate success. And so that's helpful. And then there's the accountability portion. And then I look at, how am I accountable to these things? Who and how am I accountable? Is that just me? Is there an outside party that I can incorporate? And typically that's either going to be people that I know from an accountability group. It's going to be focus mate, like using those focus mate sessions. And yeah, the process at this point takes me about an hour on Sundays. And it just really helps me feel prepared for the week. And I'll also kind of go through all the tasks that I have in my task manager. I'll resort those, and I'll go through my business metrics and write down the most important business metrics, financials, business health type things. And yeah, it really grounds me. And I've been doing it for a number of years now. So the process has changed, like I said, but it feels pretty dialed in now, but there will be undoubtedly more changes in the future.
Jordan, I think there are probably a lot of people listening that are like, oh yeah, that sounds great, but I don't think I could do that. More importantly, I think people would do it if you could help them quantify what the output or the outcome has been for you since doing that. How has that impacted
Yeah.
you in your business?
Yeah. And again, I would first say the best thing that people can do is the least amount that they can commit to. So you
Love
don't
that.
need to necessarily do all of these things, but what about if you just started with writing down one win a day, right? Like, what's the lowest amount that you can actually commit to that you can make sustainable? And then everything beyond that is like icing on the cake, right? For me, having a reflection process means that when I look back on my week, I don't know if you guys have ever had this, but someone will say, "Oh, how's your week been?" You're just like, I have no idea. Like, I don't remember what I did yesterday. I don't remember, you just kind of struggle to grasp at like what has been going on. I think it roots me and it grounds me in such an awareness of where I'm going, what I'm doing, and allows me to enter my week with such a peaceful state of mind. Whereas there have been times in my life where I get to Monday and I'm like, like, what do I do? Like, what do I start with? And by just taking that extra hour on Sunday to really prep my week and reflect on the last one, it's like night and day with the peace of mind that I have going into the week, and that losing that Monday feeling of just being completely distraught and like feeling like I'm in a rush. And I've noticed the more that I feel like I'm in a rush in my life, the less good everything feels, because that means that your nervous system is under constant stress. And if your nervous system's under constant stress, everything you do is going to be coming from a really bad place. Just, I think about the the fight, flight, freeze responses that happen in your nervous system when you're really stressed, and I just don't like to be in that place where I'm freaking out. So this helps
Yeah.
to not do that.
Interesting.
It's amazing when I've talked to people that have done this. I do the same thing every week, the recap and, daily kind of setting your targets and reflection and things like that. It is amazing when all of a sudden, because we've all done it, where all of a sudden if you fall off the bandwagon or the wagon for a week, how just chaotic all of a sudden you feel, and how you feel like, to your point, you look back in the week. I know there's been times where all of a sudden I'm writing my, what I accomplished for the week, feeling like I've done nothing. And then all of a sudden you start going back. You're like, oh, that was 2 days ago, man. I thought that was a month ago.
Yeah.
Like that was a big
Yeah.
win. That was great, but I've already moved past that. And so it's amazing from a mindset perspective, how quickly that shifts one way or the other, if you're doing it or not doing it.
And you get to relive those moments. I mean, the momentum that you can gain from reinforcing positivity is I mean, it's proven, right? That what we focus on ends up becoming our lens, our perspective on life. So if I'm constantly focusing on how well I'm doing, and I'm constantly writing down great things that are happening, then I am expecting more great things, and more great things are coming. So it's just like a constant feedback loop. Whereas if I wasn't doing any of that, I might slip into a negative state where I'm just constantly looking at what's missing and in the scarcity.
That's cool. I love that. Jordan, I want to switch gears to something. As I reviewed your website and your blog, you had some great stuff. The most recent one was, where all the buzz is right now, how to use artificial intelligence to land your dream job, Chat GPT. I've been talking a lot about it, obviously, in the marketing space, and Dustin and I talk about it. But give us some insight on how that works and how job seekers can use this amazing tool.
Yeah, I think most job seekers, if you inquire with them about the time that they spend on things in their job search, there are a number of application materials that take a while to write. That may be a resume, it may be a cover letter. There are a number of other processes within networking that it takes a while to figure out how to send them, like what message I'm going to send or how I'm going to do this. And I just wanted to try to figure out what use cases there were for job seekers to cut down the time where it usually might take them an hour to 5 hours to do something to take 10 minutes, 5 minutes. And so I found some of those use cases, and I've just made a video series about that and a blog about it. And I think it's kind of going to be the next wave of how efficient, like the job seekers that are going to be using ChatGPT and using some of these things with artificial intelligence to get ahead are going to be automatically in the top 1%, just because the fact that they're going to be able to do things so much faster, like fractions of the time that other people are spending. And that's where the real win is, because not only is it taking fractions of the time, but it's more fun. Like one of the things that job seekers also struggle with is that it's not fun to do a job search. So if you eliminate a large majority of the time that it takes you to do something, and your brain is less spent on brainstorming things and like thinking about, like there's kind of a 0 to 1, like getting from 0 resume to 1 full resume, like that 0 to 1 process is the hardest part. Editing the resume after you already have a full resume, a bit easier, right? So what if we could make that 0 to 1 process really quick, and then we can make the editing also really quick? And yeah, I think it's an amazing resource for that.
Cool. I'm going to ask one last question, and then we'll wrap it up. So you have another article, and I think this goes really well with the subject we're talking about, which is the most valuable skill for remote workers, where you talk about asynchronous communication. But can we talk specifically about some of the tools that you recommend your clients, those job seekers or people who are just getting acclimated to remote work? What kind of tech stack do they need to be successful?
Yeah, I also have another video on this that talks about the different types of remote tools. I think from a basic perspective, understanding what the tools do and why they're used is more important than the specific tool itself, because you may have one company who's running Asana as their task manager, and another one that's using Trello or Monday, or I could say a bunch of these names, but if you don't understand why it's used, then that doesn't really matter. So I always try to look at the root of what we're talking about, which is the most important thing within remote work is that you're able to communicate with people virtually in a way that doesn't create more work for them. Like as a basic premise, it's like the way in which you communicate through email, through text, through all these methodologies is that you give people enough information that they can take the project to the next step without needing to jump on a phone call. And so you learning to communicate in that way takes some time, and it takes really attention to detail to the documentation that you are doing every step of the way. So there are tools that support that process, right? One of those is a task manager, right? Where you have tasks that are shared among a team, and you can see the progress updates, you can see the status updates, you can comment inside the actual task, and you can do things in a way that allows you to get out of email, for instance. And all the information for that specific task is going to be in the task manager. That's going to be something like Asana, like Trello, like Monday, like I mentioned. There's also ones where like Slack, like Doist, or which has Twist. So there's these communication platforms where you can send direct messages and things like that, right? And those you also want to be careful with, because they can be the ones that really get you far away from the deep work concept, where you're now being too synchronous with people, where you're responding to messages really fast because you feel like you have to. Whereas the switch of mindset is, oh, I'm going to check that Slack at a certain time of the day. So it's not just the tools, but it's the understanding of why the tools exist and how to use them in the best way so that you're not getting completely lost.
That's awesome. Lots of good stuff. Jordan, I'd love to extend this conversation, but for sake of time, we got to put a bow on it. So that's just a really good excuse to have you back sometime in the future. I enjoyed the conversation. Before we do wrap it up, can you tell our listeners where they can find you? And don't forget to talk about where they can pick up a copy of that book.
Yeah, theremotejobcoach.com is my website. You can navigate to everything there. My book's on there, my personal profiles, everything.
What's the best platform for people to connect with you if they want to see the daily content you're churning out?
Yeah, LinkedIn's good. I also have a newsletter. So if you go on to the website, the newsletter sign-up's on the front page, and LinkedIn at Jordan Carroll. You can find me there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed that conversation, and I think our followers will too. Dustin, any final thoughts?
Jordan, excellent insights, I think, for both the people seeking the work, and even for businesses that are managing a remote workforce today. I think some excellent nuggets. So appreciate you taking the time.
To all our
Awesome.
listeners
Thanks,
out
Dustin.
there,
Thanks, Chris.
to our listeners out there, thank you so much for your ears today. We appreciate your input. We appreciate you listening. Have a great day. Peace.
Thank you for being part of the Hustle Nation. If you're serious about raising the bar in your personal and professional life and willing to go all in on your success, head over to hustleleaders.com. Here you can get access to our Hustle Productivity ebook, attend our Hustle Masterclass, or challenge yourself to the 30-day Hustle Challenge. Pairing these tools and training with the Hustle Nation podcast will help you advance to a whole new level. Until next time, stay hungry and inspire those around you to hustle.